All right, it's been a couple weeks, but we're back. The triumphant return of another Carolina podcast with no shortage of things to talk about this week. I'm your host, Pearson Fowler. You can catch me weekdays from 12 to 1 on 107.5 The Game, the home of the Gamecocks. And with me, as always, Chris Clark and Wes Mitchell. I call them Westifer and Chrisley, so I almost got tongue-tied over my own stupidity there. But plenty to talk about. We had the NFL draft this past weekend. Also this past weekend, big recruiting weekend for the Gamecocks, looking ahead to the classes of 2020 and 2021. But we'll go ahead and get started with a quick recap of the NFL draft. For those of you that haven't seen, that didn't watch, or that somehow missed it over the last 6 days, Deebo Samuel was drafted in the second round with pick number 36 to the San Francisco 49ers. Rashad Fenton went in the sixth round, pick number 201 to the Kansas City Chiefs. Also in the sixth round, Dennis Daly went to the Carolina Panthers. That was kind of cool. Always like to see Gamecocks staying around South Carolina. Like I remember when Eric Norwood was on the practice squad for the Panthers for a couple years. That was always kind of exciting because I love that dude. Also signing as undrafted free agent, Zach Bailey went to Tampa Bay. Keyshawn Nixon to Oakland. Blake Camper signed with the Los Angeles Chargers. And Bryson Allen Williams signing with the Oakland Raiders. Guys, not a lot of huge surprises here other than maybe Rashad Fenton creeping up into the sixth round. I had seen projections for Dennis Daly anywhere between 4 and 7, and then Deebo went about where he was projected to go. Were you surprised to see Rashad Fenton jump up into the sixth round like that?
Not really. I think my biggest surprise was that Zach Bailey didn't get drafted at all. I thought he would sneak into the draft somewhere. I thought that, this time last year, or a little bit before this time last year, there was talk about, is Zach Bailey going to stay for his senior year? And he was looking at, hearing what they projected him as. And then next thing you know, here we are, goes through a senior year, moved back to what I think was his more natural position at left guard, and then doesn't get drafted at all. I thought that was a surprise. Muschamp actually mentioned that, Keyshawn Nixon was a guy who would have been drafted late if not for his neck injury, and that the Raiders had their eye on him really for a long time. So otherwise, though, I wouldn't say really many surprises. Deebo, I feel like, went almost exactly where he was projected. And I don't know about you, Chris, but the more I think about where he went, I think that's like a really good fit for Deebo because, if you look at the numbers from the 49ers receivers last year, like nobody really had remotely, not even prolific, but nobody had like even good numbers for the 49ers at wide receiver. I think maybe their best receiver had like 500 yards receiving or something.
Yeah, let me tell y'all, as the proud fantasy owner of a San Francisco 49ers wide receiver, was Marquise Goodwin, is just very, very disappointing if you participated in any part of San Francisco's offense last year. Yeah,
and Garoppolo was hurt, I guess, and they'll get him back, and I think Shanahan is a good young offensive mind. I think Deebo walks into a place where they have a quarterback, they have a good offensive scheme, I think, and they have a ton of opportunity for him to play, and all those things should add together. I saw some of the projections or the odds for Rookie of the Year, and I think Deebo's among the top 10 guys on there from one of the Vegas spots, and I agree with that. I think he'll have every opportunity if you throw in, what he can do in the kickoff return game too. I think it's a good spot for him.
Definitely take a flyer there, and it's one of those things like you mentioned with Jimmy G coming back. It could be a situation where San Francisco's offense takes a huge leap, and a lot of it's because of the quarterback. But if it's a newcomer who comes in and has a 1,000-yard season or whatever, he could end up stealing a lot of headlines. And Wes, I appreciate you going there. You correctly anticipated where I wanted to go. So I'll ask you now, Chris, of the guys that have signed contracts with the NFL, both drafted and undrafted, who do you think landed in the best spot for their career?
Well, that's a good question. I would have to agree with Wes that it's Deebo simply because you look, like you said, George Kittle was their leading receiver. He's really good at tight end. He had over 1,000 yards. But aside from that, their second leading receiver is Kendrick Bourne, had 42 catches, 487 yards, and then a fullback was their third leading receiver. So, probably not ideal. I would
Juice Check, is that his name?
Yeah, that's it, Kyle. And so I think that would have to be the best situation. And Deebo can also do several things for you. He can play inside, he can play outside, and he can contribute as a special teams returner or as a gunner on special teams. We saw that big play he made at the end of the year in the Akron game. He's got a lot of athleticism, special teams players are very valuable in rosters in the NFL. So with his skill set, the need that's there offensively, and what all he can do, that's got to be. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to say anybody else.
We've seen the framework for a guy like that to come in and have success early too. When you look just a couple years ago at Pharaoh Cooper, and we can argue about who's better, whose skill set is better suited for the NFL. But regardless, he was a guy that came in and had the potential to be versatile and was an All-Pro in his first year just as a specialist with the Rams. So certainly a lot of opportunity for Debo, and probably more of an opportunity, and again, hopefully in an even better situation because you're going to have, as you mentioned, Shanahan, and you're going to have Jimmy G throwing you the ball. Yeah,
and I think, not that we have to have that conversation, but I think Debo does have a bit more NFL upside than Pharaoh, and I think he'll get more opportunities right off the bat, actually as a receiver versus just having to sort of make your way, as a special teams guy. And the other fits are sort of interesting. I know the Chiefs really struggled on defense, so that's a position. I think they added multiple defensive backs in the draft in this offseason, so that'll be interesting to see where Rashad fits in. And I was looking at some of the comments from, Marty Herney, the GM for the Panthers, and they, I guess every team is high on every guy they pick. I mean, that's just kind of how it goes. Just like every coach on signing day is high on their recruiting class, but they do seem very high on Dennis Daly's upside, and actually mentioned that, as a JUCO guy, really still hasn't just played a ton as far as like high level reps. Obviously, he started for most of 2 years for South Carolina, but he was a JUCO before that. I know he was really considered a raw player out of high school originally. So I think their thought process there is, look, this is a big kid. He has played in the SEC a couple years. He's athletic, and there's plenty for him to grow, I think, into a spot. And the Panthers have, obviously Greg Little's going to get more of an opportunity first, and he'll be talked about more. But the Panthers, I know I'm a Panthers fan. Chris is a Panthers fan. I don't know are you a Panthers fan or not really?
Yeah, I grew up a Panther fan.
Yeah, their offensive line can use all the help they can get, I feel
always.
like.
There's an opportunity for him to be, I don't want to place those types of expectations, but, I mean, he should be on the depth chart, like, now.
Oh, yeah, he's in the 2 deep.
No
question. He's in the 2 deep. I mean, yeah, and Little.
Yeah, just have a pulse and you're on the 2 deep on Carolina's offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, you're almost, really you're projecting probably Little to be the starter there this year. And then they got some other guys who are sort of swing guys that they used last year, and Daly could be one of those types of guys. But he had a really good year. I mean, I think you give him a lot of credit for.
He gave up, I think, 5, maybe 6 sacks on the year, and 3 or 4 of those were to Josh Allen, and then he had a streak of 6 or 7 games where he didn't even allow a sack.
Yeah, I mean, he had a terrible game against Josh Allen, which a lot of people did.
He's the number 7 pick in the draft, so you'll forgive him for that.
Right. And then after that, like you said, the Clemson game, I don't believe he gave up a sack. He had a really good game against Cleveland Farrell and, all those guys. So he had a really good year. I think he could have gone a little bit higher. I think sort of the 4 to 6 range was where he was sort of pegged.
Right. And like between 4, 5, 6, 7, it seems like that's all kind of a wash. Like there's I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it wouldn't surprise me if the percentage of 7th round draft picks that panned out was roughly equivalent to 4th round draft picks that panned out. I was a little bit surprised that both of y'all jumped on Debo as quickly as you did for the best landing spot. I mean, obviously he was the best prospect. There's a reason that he went in the 2nd round as opposed to the 6th or undrafted. But I thought, and we touched on it a little bit, both Fenton and Daly are going to have at least as good a chance to come in and contribute right away because of the problems that the Panthers have had on the offensive line. And there was a picture just floating around Twitter sort of after the draft of just what the Chiefs' defensive backfield depth chart was, and everyone was just like, LOL. But I saw that, and I was like, this is a great opportunity for Rashad Fenton to come in and to make an impact right away. And all of a sudden, if that group is overachieving, sort of like what we were talking about with Debo being a factor in San Francisco turning its offensive woes around, if the Chiefs secondary overachieves its very, very low expectations, they're probably going to be looking at a guy. And again, this all assumes that he's going to play, but I think he has proven that he's good enough to at least be out there in some capacity, even if it's just as like a nickel or a backup corner. I think that's a great landing spot for him. The only 2 guys that I look at and I say this is not an ideal situation is Zach Bailey and Bryson Allen Williams going to. I don't know if I would rather be a Bucs fan or a Raiders fan, because the Bucs are terrible just because they're terrible, and the Raiders are terrible because John Gruden's like trying to gut the roster and like
they're trying to be terrible.
Yeah, they're trying to be terrible.
Better later.
So I don't know what's worse, but I feel really bad for both of those guys because that's NFL purgatory right there.
Well, and I that's where I was going to go. Which guy do y'all think that went undrafted has the best chance at just being that guy that sticks around and has a long NFL career? Because I feel like even watching these guys for 4 and 5 years, it's been very hard for me to peg. Like, I'll be like, oh, I think that guy will stick in the league for a long time, and then they're done in 2 years. Or sometimes guys that I'm like, I don't know if that's going to happen, and they find a way to stick out in the league for, you look 6 years later, they're still in the league. Some guys find a way to stick around, and sometimes you have to go, it's practice squad for a couple of years, and then special teams is a great avenue into the league, and you sort of go from there. But I mean, Damiere Byrd stuck in the league way longer than I thought he would.
And he's still on the Panthers, right? He's dealt with a lot of injuries the last couple of years, but he's in there from time to time.
Yep.
And then Isaiah Johnson obviously was just here for a year, but he just got a new contract with the Bucs not too long ago, I think. So it's been tough for me to peg. But who do y'all think? Just from what we've seen, I guess Zach Bailey's probably the easy answer.
Yeah,
but,
it's Bailey. And Bird's with the Cardinals. I messed up on that. The Cardinals signed him earlier this spring.
I saw that he left. But the Cardinals are collecting former Gamecocks.
They are. They're stocking them.
Yeah.
It's got to be Bailey, though, because I think he's the guy that has, Bryson Allen Williams maybe could have been more of that guy if he, his testing numbers hurt him in the injury history in terms of getting more looks or getting that free agent contract. He's got really what adds up to a tryout with the Raiders right now. But I think he's a great locker room guy, and he's a good player. I mean, he's got some really good film from his college days. He just unfortunately had some injuries, and then his testing numbers, I think, slipped him too. But Bailey is, I think, who you would point to because, he has versatility. He has a lot of SEC experience, and he's played every position, hasn't he? I mean, I don't think he played left tackle at Carolina, but he played the other 4.
Yeah, I mean, he's played guard, tackle, center. Yeah, so if you group it like that, he's played everywhere.
Yeah, that'd probably be my pick too. I think it's safer because he is just kind of like a sure thing, and even if he's not going to be a star, like his floor, I feel like is higher than the other 3 guys. He at least seems like he could be, a backup or at the very worst, like a, practice squad kind of guy. With Nixon and with Camper and Allen Williams, I'm not so sure. Allen Williams, I looked at him when you asked me that question, and I thought, that's a guy that is just that by all indications, everything that the coaching staff and people around the team have said, just has an incredible work ethic, and those guys seem to just succeed in the NFL. Even if you don't have the physical skills, you can work hard enough to just earn that job. But he's such a tweener. He doesn't. I mean, he was a tweener in the SEC. He's going to be even more of a tweener in the NFL. He's not big enough to be on the line. He's not fast enough to really be a true linebacker. I mean, he is listed as a linebacker now. For the Raiders, or when the Raiders signed him, it was linebacker Bryson Allen Williams. He doesn't have that kind of speed, and frankly, I don't know. I know Coach Muschamp liked him a lot, and I think he had a good last year here in Columbia. But I guess last season before he got injured, I thought that he didn't do a lot of things well that I would have liked to see someone like that do very well. So again, as much as I would like to pick him because it seems like he's just a high character guy that's just going to work really hard, I feel like it's just going to be too hard for him to stick in the league as a tweener. You look at someone like Devontae Holloman, who had trouble in the league, and I think obviously it was a neck injury that ended his career in the NFL more than not being able to fit in. But he was really, really good at Carolina, and was a little bit bigger than Bryson Allen Williams, I think, and so not quite as much of a tweener. But even him, it took him a while for him to settle into that role in Dallas. So that's sort of, I guess, the upside that I would maybe look at for Allen Williams. And then I think Holloman then even ended up playing safety for Dallas, where he was playing more of like that linebacker kind of spur hybrid here at Carolina. So I'll go boring and agree with y'all and say it's probably Bailey.
Yeah, but I think Holloman ended up playing linebacker.
Was that it?
With the Cow? I think he was more
of a linebacker than a safety?
He was more safety spur here, and then I think they put weight on him as opposed to
that sounds
it
right.
off.
He had to, I think maybe because of injury, but he ended up playing middle linebacker his last season. Had a nice year.
Yeah, but like I said at the beginning, though, it's really hard, I feel like. And some of it is going to be about the situation and probably deeper into the situation than we even know. Like it's not even really about the starters for some of these guys. It's like, which practice players do they have that they really like, that they see a future with? Which special team spots are they looking for a very particular skill set to take over? And I'm hopeful for Bryson that he can, maybe stick as a practice squad player at first and then get on special teams and then sort of find a way. And I don't even know enough about the Raiders' defensive scheme as far as how they use their linebackers. Are they more 4 down front, 3 down?
I think they're mostly just bad.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, their defensive scheme is traded Khalil Mack. That's what scheme they run.
Traded Khalil Mack and then complained about not having pass rushers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Incredible. So yeah, that's the one thing. When you look at Zach Bailey and Keyshawn Nixon and Bryson Allen Williams going to the Bucs and then the Raiders respectively, and I mentioned earlier, those are just, that's the black hole of the NFL. On the one hand, because those teams are bad, you feel like all 3 of these guys will have more of a chance to come in and make an impact right away because there's no one else good on that team. But on the other hand, you just don't trust franchises like that just have a lot of roster turnover. So I really don't know what to make of those guys. And then we haven't even really mentioned Camper as a Charger. That's one that, that's a good team. They do have some stability there, but on the other hand, they have stability there, and so there's not as much turnover in the roster. So you wonder if he's a guy that is just kind of destined for the practice squad this year, and what might have happened if he did end up in sort of a Tampa Bay or in Oakland. But pretty good haul after all said and done. 7 Gamecocks at least getting some kind of contract in the immediate aftermath of the draft, including the 4 undrafted free agents.
The numbers are going up.
Yeah.
They're not, I think, where Muschamp or anybody that's a Carolina fan wants them to be. But it was 1 with Hayden last year and 0 the year before.
Right. And this year, going into the draft, I would have said 4 guys would probably sign contracts. I would have thought the first 4 that did, Debo, Daly, Fenton, and Bailey. I wouldn't have expected Nixon, Camper, and Allen Williams to get those undrafted free agent contracts right after the draft, except that Keyshawn Nixon, out of nowhere. I remember, I guess it was during the combine or during pro day. Or it would have been during pro day because he wasn't at the combine. But didn't he run a 4.3 or something ridiculous?
He averaged his averages, however many 40s he ran at pro day, averaged a 4.4. He might have had one that was in the 4.3s
during all of the seasons.
Well,
I feel like he was always getting beat deep. Was that more positional stuff than his speed?
Yeah, I think it was more just technique type things.
That blew me away. I was like, "There's no way he was."
He did play hurt some.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah.
So,
and he's got that. You're talking about a guy that was pretty highly recruited out of JUCO, and I believe everybody runs together at some point for me. But didn't he play a lot of? He played receiver early on. I feel like in his career. I might be mixing him up, but. I think he was always viewed as a guy that has some upside, and I expected him to have a really big senior year, and then he had some good moments, and he had some down moments, and but apparently the Raiders, Muschamp talked about him on, was that Monday or Tuesday? Whenever that was, Monday, that basically, the Raiders had their eyes on him and really wanted the guy, and that's a guy they maybe would have drafted late if not for the injury, so, we'll see. Like I said, it's just hard to say.
And to your larger point, it's just a good sign the numbers are going up. Your coworker here, Chris Lee Clark, wrote a nice little write-up about the upcoming prospects. Everyone's putting out their 2020 mock draft, which is just absolutely stupid. I hate that people do that this early, but just what Gamecocks people will have an eye on. And you mentioned probably 10 or 12 names without counting. I don't have it right in front of me. And you all should obviously go check that out on Gamecock Central. But you have the headliners. You have the Jake Bentley, and, you mentioned Shi Smith, and obviously Brian Edwards is going to be in there. And you have, some of those guys, DJ Wanham, and then a whole crew of other guys that could possibly find themselves in this undrafted free agent signing a contract on Sunday kind of territory. And that's exactly what you want to see. That's a very clear indication that this thing's moving in the right direction.
Who are we talking about 1 year from today as being drafted first?
Kinlaw.
Brian Edwards.
I think it's Kinlaw. That's who I'd pick.
That's what I would pick, too. I think that's probably the safest. Because I think Kinlaw, now whether Kinlaw, and I think you probably made this point, whether Kinlaw goes first round or not, or fourth round, is going to entirely depend on what he does this season. But I think Kinlaw is the guy that has the skill set already, the size, the speed at that size, the strength. He's drafted, I think, third or fourth round, just almost based on that alone, I feel like, because the NFL guys are going to fall in love with this dude that is that big yet that quick.
Yeah, and I think last year was probably a frustrating year when you're looking at his prospects, especially to be playing in the NFL. because it wasn't a great statistical year. But if you watch the games, most of the football games I would watch at least more than once, and you can see that he is absolutely devastating on so many plays where nothing good ends up happening because everyone else on that defense was either out of position or just getting their butts blocked off or whatever. I'll be really curious to see now that they have a little bit more depth, a little bit more talent, a little more experience for some of those younger guys that didn't exactly know where to be on the defensive line, and then hopefully some improvement at the linebacker position. I think we'll see his productivity skyrocket. So that's a really good pick. My Brian Edwards pick is mostly just wishful thinking because I've said ever since his freshman year, that dude looks like an NFL receiver, and I just want it to be the case of Ed, and he still could be. He's got to be a lot more productive and obviously struggled with drops a little bit last year, but I mean, Edwards looks as much like a pro receiver as anyone you're going to find.
I mean, it's tougher with skill guys sometimes because they're not, I don't want to say they're dime a dozen in the NFL, but a little bit more. Edwards, for me, I mean, the question is just consistency. What is he going to run is sort of hard to peg.
Yeah.
That's a big thing.
Yeah, but what Alshon Jeffrey run?
Well,
but
Alshon's a different beast.
I mean, he's a better vertical receiver, but what maybe Alshon has over Brian in terms of his verticality, Edwards probably has a little bit in speed, but he's also big. He's big and physical, not as big or as physical as Alshon, but just a little bit quicker.
I think this says he ran. Let's see what he ran.
He slimmed down for the combine, but
remember when everyone thought he was fat his senior year?
Yeah, he's stayed a little bit. He's played a little bit slimmer in the NFL than he did in college, but Alshon was a freak. You threw the ball up, Alshon was going to catch it almost every time.
He ran a 4.48.
Really?
Alshon did.
God. Really? No way.
At 6'3", 220 with his tape. So
I guess it doesn't look like it with those long legs. He takes 6 steps and he's done. And you're like,
and he was still a second rounder. Yeah. So I mean, that's what and you look at running back's different than receiver, but Travion Williams from A&M ran for 1,800 yards last year, and I think he went in the 6th round.
Well, that has more to do with running backs.
Yeah, a little bit. But we've seen a lot of good receivers. We've even seen some come out early that shouldn't have maybe, but they've slipped. And these are guys that their numbers are either comparable or maybe even better, and maybe they're even a little bit more explosive than Edwards. Now, they don't maybe have the ball skills that he does. I just think it's tough. I think even if he has a pretty darn good year next year, a lot of people if a receiver has a great year, people are, oh, he's a first-round pick. Well, there's only 32 of those. There's a lot of really good players.
And most of those are going to be defensive players if the last couple of drafts have been an indication.
Yeah, I mean, linemen and quarterbacks, there's always going to be a run on. So, I mean, it's sort of like in recruiting, Wes, when a guy, I remember Farrow, he was really good in high school. He started out as a 2-star. Everybody knew that was bunk. He moves up, but then, he should be a 5-star. Just because he's a really good player. It's no, not, So I think it's just important with the whole draft thing to keep some perspective about it. And I think that's why I'd pick Kinlaw, just because he's a lineman. He's got some freakiness about him that teams are going to like.
Well, and I always thought it was interesting whether you believe or not the Pro Football Focus grades, whether you think that they're accurate or not. But Kinlaw was pretty much by far the highest graded South Carolina football player last year for the season, which those grades try to take into account what you're talking about, not necessarily production, but did you do what you were supposed to do on any given play? Did you did you make a big play? Did you basically go above and beyond on any particular play? And he had, I think, the two best graded games. His Vanderbilt game.
The Vanderbilt game was, I would guess that was number one for him.
Yeah, he graded a 94, I think, which on their grading scale is elite of the elite. And then I think against Akron of all teams, he had a huge day and graded a 90. But his overall,
so he was the only person that showed up for that game.
Yeah, it is. His overall grade for the year was an 84, I think, which is really, really good on their scale.
And he played hurt.
And he played hurt for a lot of that.
Yeah, the hip injury that he eventually got surgery for.
I mean, there's, to your point, there's a lot to like about Javon Kinlaw as a player, and the NFL teams are going to say, we can get more out of him because he's still, a guy that just has not played a ton of football, especially inside. You're talking about a kid that was a tight end / defensive end in high school, was tiny. He was never really tiny, but as far as weight, was not a big kid. And then he moves inside at JUCO. Then he slims down and at USC, and just he's not had a ton of reps at a high level at the current size that he's at. So they're going to say, hey, we could get a lot more out of this guy.
Really looking forward to I think he's going to have a big year. Again, not even because I think he's necessarily going to be better, because I think he had really good games. As you're mentioning, had really good games without necessarily having the statistics to back it up, but I feel like we're going to see a little bit more of that. I'm still going to go Brian Edwards just to be different, and also because I feel like the potential. I mean, Brian Edwards, if I tell you that he has 1,400 yards and 13 touchdowns next year, y'all wouldn't be surprised. He's got that potential. He's got crazy upside. I love his physicality, good feet. He has shown that he's got strong hands. He can go up and get a ball. I don't know. I've always liked Brian Edwards. Maybe this is like one of my blind spot things where I just really liked him as a freshman, and so I'm going to overrate him for the rest of his career.
Maybe.
Yep.
No.
All right. Y'all both hate Brian Edwards. Moving on. So the other side of this.
Brian.
Huh?
I said, just kidding, Brian.
Nah, dude, Brian, I'm your guy right here. Come on my show. Come talk about I don't know how much better you're going to be than everyone thinks this year. How much better you're going to be than Wes and Chris are giving you credit for. The other side of this, obviously talking about Gamecocks making it to the pros. Before they do that, they got to come to South Carolina. And this past weekend, big recruiting weekend, a lot of big names in town. Even though it's the off season, that's always been kind of weird to me. I feel like the biggest recruiting visits are normally in season. That's when I schedule all my big recruiting visits in NCAA football, like 2014 or whatever. But who were some of the big names, and what were some of the reactions that you heard from some of the notables coming into Columbia this past weekend?
Tank Bigsby be the guy you got to start with because of the position he plays at running back. He's one of the best in the country at that position. So, nothing terribly new there after the visit, but, I mean, he's been on campus numerous times this year already, remains a huge priority. It's an all-SEC battle with LSU, Tennessee, Georgia, Auburn also in the mix. South Carolina's gotten into good position there. I think they've maintained and even improved upon that. So feedback was still positive, probably even more positive than usual with Tank, and heading into sort of probably a summer decision sometime before his senior year. And so South Carolina's got to try to hold on there, but that was another big step for them. Also had some offensive linemen in town that were important. Kobe Baines, a recent offer from Jacksonville. They had a couple underclassmen from Georgia, and Micah Morris and T.J. Ferguson. And then Javion Cohen, who was committed to South Carolina for a short time out of Alabama. That was another key for them to get him on campus for another visit.
Wes, zooming out a little bit, more big picture. Chris and I talked about this a little bit on our local show just about an hour ago. We had somebody ask Chris what he thought the over-under was, or he said if the over-under for five-star guys in the 2020 class is 1.5. You go to the 2019 class, you got Zach Pickens. That's one five-star guy, and he's looking for, moving in the right direction. We were talking about seeing more Gamecocks get drafted or at least sign undrafted free agent deals. You got to see that on the front end, too, I think, by and large. You got to see an increase of those 4- and 5-star guys. Got to get to that blue chip ratio, which I've recently become enamored with. I think it's really smart. When you're looking at, again, zooming out, looking at the 2020 class and the 2021 classes, Carolina just got its first commit for 2021. Very exciting. What do you think? Over, under 1.5 5-star guys in 2020?
I still think you have to go under. Just because I'm trying to, and I'm thinking about our rankings as well, and the number of true 5-star guys that they're in on. It's not a ton of them. I would say under. I think they can get one. I think in a Jordan Birch. I think in order to get a second, it would be a situation where maybe a 4-star guy that we're already talking about gets that bump up to 5-star status. But if we're talking about like just the current 5-star guys, then it would be a pretty easy under for me. Could it end up being where the final rankings, it ends up being, a couple of 5-stars? I could see it, but I would feel pretty comfortable, I think going under on that. But, I think if, and Jordan Birch was not in the group that was on campus this past weekend, but he's right up there as one of the most key guys in this class for just numerous reasons. And I think not only the fact that he's a great football player, but he's at a position where you have to continue to get great football players that you could turn around and team him up with Zach Pickens on the defensive line. He's a different player than Zach Pickens, whereas Zach's more of a, versatile inside-outside guy that does, pass rush, can stop the run, can hold up inside as well. Birch is more of a true pass rush, long, lean, athletic guy that I think they're going to need, especially with DJ Wanham graduating after this season. And I say that to say I don't think that's going over, but I still think if the answer ends up being just one, then that is still a huge sign of progress, because you're also talking about beating Clemson head-to-head on an in-state guy for the second straight year, and in a time period, which we're in right now, where the two teams really just don't butt heads on the recruiting trail head-to-head very often at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's that progress you're talking about. It's incremental, and then you also got to look at that next group of guys, because the blue chip ratio isn't all about 5-star guys, because there's only a handful of those. It's 4 and 5-star guys. So the thing that I wonder, and the thing that you mentioned, someone that Carolina's already pursuing, like a Tank Bigsby, maybe being bumped up, and you look at
he's right there too.
Right.
Like I think is he 32nd in the country?
Yeah, he's in the. I was going to say either 30s or 40s.
Yeah, Chris mentioned to me earlier that he was pretty close, and I wonder, like, I don't know what the final aggregate would be or where Helinski ended up, but he seems like just a 5-star guy. As much attention as he's gotten, as much talent as he has. Obviously, he's a 4-star guy. When all said and done, he could end up, if he's as good as everyone says he's going to be, it's going to be the equivalent of having a 5-star for Carolina. How close did he end up to being 5-star?
Do you know off the top of your head, Chris? I know Ryan was the number 3 pro-style quarterback in the country. He
finished in the 40s, I believe.
And it was 20 or 25?
While we're right here. He was 45.
So 20 off or whatever?
Yeah, probably about 20 off. I mean, it depends on the class. You'll normally get anywhere from the low 20s. I mean, sometimes you'll get, like, I feel like I've recalled maybe a year where there's 30 or so 5-stars.
It feels like 25 is kind of the...
There were 35 stars last year. I think they bumped that number up. I think it was in the 20s. So yeah, there were 35 stars. So he's 15 away. Pretty close.
So is the number 45 player in the country really any different than the number 30 player in the country?
15 spots, Wes. This is all that matters is the recruiting rankings. Don't you know this?
Yeah. So not in reality, there's not. You're splitting hairs basically, and you're talking about what 2 according to these rankings, 2 pro style quarterbacks that they're saying are better than Ryan Helinski in the entire country. And you went out to California to land the kid. Like
all of a sudden he's like the best ambassador for your school that you've had since Asia Wilson left last year.
And right now there's 26 5-stars for the 2020 rankings, and Tank Bigsby is number 31, so he's 5 away.
30. Okay.
From being there.
Wow.
So we just need 4 of those. We just need 32 and 26. You
31 and 26.
So we just need 5 of those kids to get really fat over the summer or something, and Tank can jump up or something. Not the offensive lineman though. Being fat would help them.
Or for Tank to just
Tank to just tank his way through his last season.
I don't know what you have to do to move up 6 spots. It's all splitting hairs.
Wes,
frankly.
Do you think anyone named Tank could not be good at football, especially at a position like running back?
Probably not.
Excellent. You know what that's called?
I know you're trying to...
Chris knows what this is called. What's this called, Chris?
Atrophy. I forgot. I've already forgot.
Brain atrophy. An
yes.
aptronym.
Aptronym, yeah.
Aptronym is when your name...
Today on Pearson makes us all feel stupid.
No, I just learned this word. I just learned this word.
We don't.
I learned this word 6 days ago. And I wasn't stupid 6 days ago or 7 days ago. It's just a fun thing. There's no reason for you to know this word other than if you play a lot of bar trivia, which I kind of do, and it's fun. Okay. But it's an aptronym.
So
when your name sort of mimics people what you do. And
so Tank Bigsby.
Yeah. And traditionally it's one of those things where if your last name was Smith, and your ancestors were probably blacksmiths or something like that. So it has some
Debo, just Debo's people,
right?
On the field.
There is some historical precedent for it. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Another Carolina Podcast. I want to remind you, as always, that if you like what you hear and you want us to do more of it, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends. That really does help us keep doing this. Also want to remind you to subscribe to the Gamecock Central newsletter, which you get every weekday morning. It's great. It's free. And if you're not a member of the site, it's a great way to keep up with everything that's going on. And if you do want to be a member of the site and you're maybe a little bit on the fence about it, here's an exclusive podcast code for you. If you just go to Gamecock Central and use the code GCPOD, you get 30 days as a member for free. So you can try it out, and you're, of course, going to love it and then sign up long term. But that gets you 30 days for free. Just use the code GCPOD. We'll talk to you next week.